Alara lived a life carved from silence and solitude. For 3 decades, her small cabin had been her entire world, a stubborn island of weathered wood against a sea of ancient pines. Her husband was a memory held in the worn grain of the rocking chair on the porch and the sturdy axe handle that fit so perfectly in her hands. She was 74 years old, and the forest was her only constant neighbor. It whispered secrets she had long ago learned not to question. Her days followed a simple, predictable rhythm. She woke with the pale dawn. She tended her small garden, her knuckles pressing into the cool, dark earth. She chopped wood for the stove, the sharp crack of the splitting logs the loudest sound for miles. She read the same dozen books over and over again, their pages soft as cloth. Her life was quiet. It was contained. But lately, the forest's whispers had changed. They had grown deeper. Some nights, a sound would rise from the valley, a long, mournful cry that was not bear nor wolf. It was a sound of immense loneliness that resonated in her own bones. During the day, she felt a new weight in the air. She felt watched. She tried to dismiss it. The woods played tricks on an old mind. But the signs became harder to ignore. A colossal footprint near the creek, pressed so deep into the mud it looked like a crater. A series of thick branches on an old oak, snapped clean at a height no man or machine could reach. She saw them, noted them, and chose to believe they were just another part of the forest's unknowable life. A storm gathered one evening in late autumn. The sky turned the color of a deep bruise. Wind howled through the pines, a sound like a grieving giant. Rain came down in solid sheets, hammering against her metal roof in a deafening torrent. Alara sat by her stove, the firelight dancing on her wrinkled face, and listened to the fury of the world outside. She was not afraid. The cabin had withstood worse. The storm broke just before dawn. An unnatural quiet fell over the land, the kind that follows a great and terrible violence. Steam rose from the damp earth as the first rays of sun pierced the clouds. Alara opened her front door, expecting to see a world washed clean, littered with fallen branches and pine needles. She did not expect the basket. It sat in the very center of her porch, a small, dark shape against the wet wood. It was crudely woven from cedar bark and thick ferns, clearly made by hands that were immensely strong but not accustomed to delicate work. A raw, earthy smell clung to it, the scent of damp soil, and something musky, something alive. She froze. Her first thought was that it was a trick, a prank by some lost hiker or local youths, though she had not seen another soul in years. But who would come all this way in such a storm? Her heart began to beat a little faster. She took a hesitant step forward, her bare feet cold on the damp planks. Inside the basket, something stirred. A small, weak sound reached her ears, a tiny whimper that was almost lost in the drip of water from the eaves. It was a sound of pure, helpless need. She crept closer, peering over the edge of the woven bark. It was a baby, but it was not human. Its body was small, no larger than a newborn child, but it was covered in a coat of fine, dark brown hair. Its face was startlingly expressive, with a flattened nose and wide, dark eyes that were sealed shut in sleep. Its long, delicate fingers were curled into tiny fists. It was impossibly real. A cold wave of fear washed over her. Her mind raced, trying to find a rational explanation. A monkey escaped from a zoo, a strange, unknown primate, but she was thousands of miles from any such place. The deep cries from the forest echoed in her memory. The giant footprints, the snapped branches. She understood. The truth settled in her chest not with a crash, but with a slow, heavy certainty. This was their child. The child of the silent giants who watched her from the trees. The thing of legend and folklore was real, and it had left its young on her doorstep. Her immediate instinct was to retreat, to slam the door, bolt it shut, and pretend she had seen nothing. This was not her world. This was a secret too large and too dangerous for one old woman to carry. But the infant shivered, a violent tremor that shook its tiny frame. Another weak cry escaped its lips. Alara looked at its fragile form, at the vulnerability of this impossible creature left to the mercy of the cold morning. Her fear began to recede, replaced by a feeling she understood far better. It was the same ache she felt when she found a bird with a broken wing or a fawn separated from its mother. It was compassion. She could not leave it to die. That choice was not in her. With trembling hands, she reached down and lifted the basket. It was surprisingly light. The infant did not wake. She carried it inside, away from the chill of the morning, and shut the door behind her. Her cabin felt different now, charged with the presence of this small miracle. She placed the basket on the hearth, close to the warmth of the dying embers. She gently unwrapped the leaves that swaddled the infant. Its skin was cool to the touch. It needed warmth. It needed food. She found her thickest wool blanket, the one her husband had favored, and carefully wrapped the tiny creature in its folds. The infant sighed in its sleep, nestling into the soft fabric. Alara watched it for a long moment, her mind a storm of questions. Why here? Why her? She had no answers. She only had the immediate need of the small life in her care. She went to her small pantry and retrieved a jar of goat's milk from her neighbor down the valley, a man she saw only twice a year. She warmed it gently over the stove, testing the temperature against her wrist the same way she had for her own son so many years ago. Feeding it was a delicate challenge. She used a small eyedropper from her medicine cabinet, squeezing the warm milk into the corner of the infant's mouth. It stirred, its lips instinctively suckling. It drank eagerly, its small body relaxing with every drop. A sense of profound wonder filled Alara. She was feeding a creature from a forgotten world. For 3 days, this became their routine. She fed the infant, kept it warm, and held it against her chest, feeling its steady, slow heartbeat. It rarely cried. Its dark eyes, now open, would watch her with a startling intelligence. They were old eyes in a new face, full of a quiet wisdom she could not comprehend. She whispered to it, her voice soft and low. You are not alone. But they were not alone. She knew it. The feeling of being watched intensified. It was a constant, heavy pressure on the edges of her awareness. The forest was no longer just a collection of trees. It was a silent, waiting presence. The mournful cries had stopped. They had been replaced by an unnerving stillness. On the 3rd evening, as twilight bled across the sky, she saw him. He stood at the far edge of her clearing, a silhouette of impossible size against the darkening pines. He was immense, a mountain of muscle and dark fur. He did not move. He did not make a sound. He simply stood and watched the cabin, his head tilted slightly as if listening for a sign. Fear, cold and sharp, pricked at her skin. But it was different now. It was mixed with something else. Oh. She looked at the giant figure, the father of the child sleeping by her fire, and she felt no malice from him. Only a profound, desperate attention. She did not run. She did not hide. She picked up the sleeping infant, bundled securely in the wool blanket, and walked to the front door. She opened it and stepped onto the porch. The cool evening air washed over her. The giant at the tree-lean remained perfectly still, but she could feel his gaze lock onto the small bundle in her arms. This was the test. She knew it instinctively. He was judging her. He was watching to see what she would do. Would she show fear? Aggression? Would she harm the child? She stood her ground, her heart hammering against her ribs, and simply held the infant. She wanted him to see that it was safe, that it was warm. For what felt like an hour, they stood in a silent standoff. The human woman on her porch and the mythic creature at the edge of the woods. Then, as darkness fully consumed the clearing, he turned. He did not run. He simply melted back into the shadows of the forest, vanishing as if he had never been there. This vigil became a ritual. Every evening, he would appear. Sometimes he was alone. Sometimes, a second, slightly smaller figure stood beside him, her form radiating an aura of deep sorrow. The mother. They watched Alara from a distance as she sat on her porch in the rocking chair, the infant cradled in her arms. She would hum old lullabies, her voice a fragile thread in the vast wilderness. She never tried to approach them. She never made any sudden moves. She simply showed them her care. She showed them that their child was not a prisoner, but a guest. She left bowls of fresh water and berries on the edge of the porch, but they were never touched. They did not want her offerings. They wanted only to observe, to trust. One night, after a week of this silent communion, the male creature did something different. He took 3 slow, deliberate steps out from the tree-lean, into the pale moonlight of the clearing. He was larger than she could have imagined. He towered over the landscape, a being of primal power. He stopped and slowly raised one massive, dark hand. He placed it over the center of his own chest. The gesture was unmistakable. It was not a threat. It was a communication, a sign of peaceful intent, a recognition. Alara felt tears well in her eyes. She slowly, carefully, mirrored the gesture, placing her own frail hand over her heart. He held her gaze for a long moment, his dark eyes seeming to hold all the sorrow of the world. Then he retreated once more into the shadows. The test was over. She had passed. 2 nights later, the climax of this strange, silent story arrived. The 2 creatures appeared at dusk, as they always did. But this time, they did not stop at the edge of the woods. The female began to walk toward the cabin. Her steps were halting, unsteady. The male walked close beside her, his huge arms supporting her, his presence a shield. As they drew closer, Alara saw the reason for her weakness. A terrible, deep gash ran along the female's side, matted with dried blood and dirt. It was an injury that must have caused her immense pain, making it impossible for her to nurse or carry her child. Alara finally understood everything. They had not abandoned their baby. They had saved it. They had brought it to the one place they sensed might offer sanctuary while the mother fought for her life. The female creature stopped about 10 feet from the porch steps. She was exhausted, her huge body trembling with the effort. She let out a low, guttural cry, a sound of such profound grief and pain that it tore at Alara's heart. It was the sound of a mother who had been separated from her child. She lowered her head in a gesture of supplication. Alara knew what she had to do. The infant was sleeping peacefully in the basket by the door, warm and full. She gently knelt and picked it up. She looked from the child in her arms to the grieving mother in her yard. She walked to the edge of the porch and carefully placed the infant back into its woven cradle. "It's for you," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. She gave the basket a gentle push, sending it sliding across the smooth wooden planks until it stopped at the very edge, just above the steps. The massive male creature moved first. He stepped forward, his eyes never leaving Alara's. There was no menace in his gaze, only a deep, bottomless well of gratitude. He bent down, his enormous frame moving with a surprising grace, and lifted the basket as if it weighed nothing at all. He held it out to the female. The mother let out a soft rumble, a sound of pure relief. She reached into the basket with fingers as thick as branches, yet her touch was impossibly gentle. She stroked the fine hair on her baby's head. She leaned against the male, her great body finally relaxing, the ordeal over. The pair did not leave immediately. They stood there in the moonlight, a complete family once more. The male looked directly at Alara. He held her gaze for a long, silent moment. Then, he gave a slow, deliberate nod. It was a gesture of immense respect, a farewell from one world to another. It was a thank you more powerful than any words. Then, they turned. Together, they walked away from the cabin, their colossal forms moving with a quiet dignity. They did not hurry. They walked back toward the dark wall of the forest, the place of secrets and shadows that was their home. They reached the tree-line and, without a final glance, they were gone. They dissolved into the night. Alara stood on her porch for a long time, the cold seeping into her bones. The clearing was empty. The forest was silent again. But the silence was different now. It was heavier. It felt hollow. The world that had felt so full just moments before was now defined by a great and sudden absence. She went back inside and sat in her rocking chair. The wool blanket lay on the floor where she had left it. She picked it up and held it to her face. It still carried the faint, earthy scent of the infant, the scent of the wild, the scent of a secret she would carry for the rest of her life. She never told anyone. Who would believe the story of an old woman who lived alone in the woods? They would call her crazy. They would send men with guns and nets to hunt for the creatures, to capture or kill them. They would turn a moment of trust and tenderness into a spectacle. The secret was not a burden. It was a gift. In the years that followed, Alara continued her quiet life. But something inside her had shifted forever. The forest was no longer just her neighbor. It was a sanctuary. Her solitude was no longer a state of being alone. It was a state of communion with a world far grander and more mysterious than she had ever known. She had looked into the eyes of the impossible, and it had looked back not with rage, but with a shared understanding of love, of loss, and of hope. She had been trusted with the most precious thing in their world, and in caring for it, her own world had become infinite.